Thanks so much, Nika. Hello, everyone. And on behalf of the Initiative for MPT's Secretariat staff, I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for participating in today's webinar on MPT end user research. This is the final webinar in this year's MPT Technical Webinar Series, and I encourage you all to check out recordings of past webinars that we've had in this series on bioequivalence and bioavailability for MPTs, as well as mathematical modeling, and these are on the IMPT website. And as Nika said, my name is Laura Delplane, and I'm Project Manager for the initiative. We are a product-neutral international collaboration of experts working together to advance the growing MPT field. So by way of a little bit of background, some of you may be familiar with this slide, but I wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page about what distinguishes MPTs from other health prevention products. And it is that they deliver simultaneous prevention of at least 2 health risks: unintended pregnancy, HIV, and other STIs. It is important to note that while the focus of the MPT field right now is on products that combine HIV prevention and contraception, these are not the only MPTs in development. There are also critical opportunities for MPTs that combine other STI prevention with either HIV prevention or contraception. On top of the potential range of prevention combinations for MPTs, there are also a variety of different product strategies in the pipeline. In addition to co-formulated products, such as rings, vaginal inserts, and patches, to name a few, there are other strategies that may be available in the shorter term. For example, co-administered methods like combining a diaphragm with a gel, or co-administration of a contraceptive injectable with an injectable of an anti-HIV drug, are options for multi-purpose prevention as well. The potential advantages of co-packaging a product like oral PrEP and an oral contraceptive is also being considered. When the Initiative for MPTs was first formed, this collaboration was tasked with determining the technical feasibility of MPTs. Central to this assessment and the subsequent progression of the MPT field, however, was the IMPT's recognition that meaningfully incorporating women's perspectives and context into early stages of product development is critical. For the past several years, the IMPT has worked with stakeholders from a range of sectors to ensure that clinical decisions are supported by social behavioral research and market research. As part of this process, the IMPT Secretariat has worked to understand what we already know about future MPT end users and what research gaps remain. We are excited to see increased interest and momentum in end user research for product development, particularly in the HIV prevention space, work that is beginning to examine some of these unknowns. For the IMPT's webinar series, we thought it would be useful to provide an update on the latest end user research relevant to the MPT field. In today's webinar, we are hosting 3 exciting presentations from partners in the MPT field who are all working to better understand future MPT end users and what product strategies will best fit into their lives. In the interest of time, we will be saving all questions until the end, but please feel free to type your questions into the chat box on your screen as they arise. First up are Moushira El-Sahn and Jeff Lucas of Routes to Results, who will be discussing their recent end user research supported by MTN. Moushira is a social behavioral market research expert based in Abu Dhabi. She has 10 years of research experience across pharmaceutical, consumer, and public health, and is at ease across various qualitative and quantitative research techniques, including motivational research and developing insight. She has led research across the Middle East and North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Asia. Moushira has an MA in Human Rights Law from SOAS University of London, and an MA in Philosophy, Politics, and Economics from the University of Oxford. Jeff Lucas is a Sub-Saharan African market research and public health expert based in London. He has over 20 years of research experience leading research for public health organizations such as the WHO, PATH, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He has developed key opinion leader work in public health, speaking with stakeholders in Africa and Asia. Moushira and Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Laura and Catherine, for organizing this. So we're just going to share quite briefly our presentation on the qualitative findings from the discussions that we had with 18 to 21-year-old young women in South Africa, which we partnered with the Microbial Trials Network to take. We actually just finished the quantitative findings, which were presented at the MTN Regional Conference this month, and we suggest everyone to get the website to find the presentation. It will be on the section about the MTN regional meeting if you'd like to see what we've learned in the quantitative phase. Okay. I'm trying to switch the slide. Unfortunately, I can't do that. Okay, cool. Thank you. So just to frame the findings, on the left you'll see a photograph which was very representative of the sorts of young women we were talking to. They were informed, aspirational, and open young women. In their eyes, information is easily accessed and everywhere thanks to the internet. What this meant was that young women felt and described the need to be informed and quite well informed. Health is very important to them, and the main reason is because it will make young women feel safe, protected, and healthy. And this resonates with their general needs of just looking good and being active and being able to get on with their lives. There was an extremely positive reaction to the HIV prevention and prevention products shown. We were showing the Depivering ring and oral PrEP, and there was a willingness to try both of the HIV prevention products. If we just take a quick look at their context, what we were finding was there was scarce employment, so a lot of the young women were not employed. Some of them were still in high school, and admittedly, they described financial limitations. So this meant they were limited financially to be independent and increase their dependency on their families or their partners. They were all sexually active. Most of them were without consistent protection or control, so majorly using either the injection or condoms, but inconsistently. They also expressed privacy challenges. What we mean by this is they were living in homes that were full of other members, small homes, so could include multiple siblings, mothers and fathers, uncles and aunties. What this means is that the context is incredibly important to understand the implications for product introduction. There's impacts on cost, on access, on the integration of male partners, and the integration and engagement of community through communication messaging. It has to be inclusive. Young women are very well aware that what they should be doing, and they're very well aware of what it means to be healthy, for example, but they aren't fully able to activate or realize or action this knowledge, and this is because of their environmental restrictions. Young women's experience were expressed through this push and pull framework, which we found through the qualitative analysis. And what that means is whilst they find certain aspects appealing which encourage change of behavior, there are also significant factors pulling young women back to prevent behavior change. Young women actually saw HIV prevention products as crucial instruments for social change, a way of actually creating the community and making their society informed, aspirational, and open, just like they are. Next slide, please. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you. So just to briefly run through some of the major findings, we looked at three essential themes. The first theme was on choice. So having shared profiles of both the Depivering ring and oral PrEP, which were expressed in consumer-friendly language and with some supporting images, what we found was there was an equal preference for the ring and the pill. So we asked them at different stages, after reviewing the profiles, which one would they try. And there was a split within the group of the young women preferring the ring versus young women preferring the pill. Just to state at this point from the quantitative data, which was done to actually validate these qualitative findings, we find there is a slightly more preference towards the pill than the ring. But what it does indicate, and this can be true for the quantitative data, is that both options are incredibly important to young women. So in the quant phase, we found that 88% of our sample would use either the ring or the pill. So it shows that choice is essential. Another important factor we learned was that decisions were being made through a comparative lens. So a young woman's appreciation or decision-making process as to which product she preferred actually was supported by an understanding of what she didn't like about the other product. They both invoke very important feelings of safety, protection, and health. They're seen as instruments to improve control and health. If we move to the second theme, which was health, we wanted to understand what young women think about sexual health and whether it actually resonated or even worked to the narrative of general health. In terms of spontaneous response, young women do not necessarily think sexual health is part of overall health, but once probed, once actually asked, young women immediately make the connection and find it as strongly relevant. What this was telling us is that the general health story needs to be part of the prevention story and not solely a medical or sexual health conversation. We also found out that non-medicalization was a very important narrative. What we realized, and this is supported in the quant data, that if something was too medical and HIV related, there was a fear of stigma and openness, and this isn't something new to us. But what we did learn was how packaging can really impact how products are viewed. So for example, the ring packaging was much more aligned with women's health products like sanitary towels. This is something that young women said we should be looking to do with the HIV prevention product because sanitary towels are both acceptable and familiar and women won't be questioned. The pill packaging was very heavily designed not to look like HIV prevention or HIV treatment especially. What it meant was that the product should look bright and attractive and actually maybe resemble products like vitamins. The final theme we were looking at was access and community. So all young women believed that the product should be free, and this was either because they mentioned that they couldn't afford it or because they were very cognizant of the fact that other young women wouldn't be able to afford it. So access should be enabled for all. There was a balance about accessibility and privacy. Pharmacies and clinics were believed to be the most relevant access points. This came in the quant, but actually health centers become more relevant. The reason they're important is because they're both professional, educated healthcare providers at these points and also accessible. Here we find out that the sources of information for health and sexual health were actually different. This in the quantitative phase was not true. So what we found in quant was actually there are very similar information sources and influences for both general health and sexual health, but we believe it's because we were asking about information sources. And what remains to be true is the impact of female influencers who at the qualitative phase we found could act as bridges for information on both health and sexual health. But at the quantitative phase, we learned that female influencers would be those women who were actual experienced users of the product, and those women would be the women who would talk to young women and tell them that it was easy to use such products or talk about their experiences, and that was incredibly important to convince them to try. Last point, and not least, we learned that the societal norms and community, which include institutions like educational institutions and religious institutions, as well as other men, which we considered separate, are critical influences, but are currently acting as disablers for change. They actually are negative influences in terms of their current perception and stance on things like sex and HIV are actually negative. Next slide, please, Catherine. Thank you so much. Thanks. When we were looking at preference for either product, as I mentioned before, the comparative lens became a very important factor. So if we just look to the left of the slide and look at the ring, we found out that the ring actually, in terms of functional characteristics, the side effects were felt to be incredibly tolerable, in particular compared to the pill. They were felt to be less severe, and therefore became part of the reason why young women prefer the ring. Some young women have a genuine dislike for taking pills and believe that they forget the daily taking of the pill at the same time. And so a one-time monthly use was believed to be much more preferable. And some mothers believe that the insertion would be easy, saying things like, well, I gave birth to a child, therefore it can't be that difficult to insert the ring. Whereas if we look to the pill, the functional reasons actually very similar but opposite. So young women believe that it was easy to use to swallow a pill and to insert a ring. The familiarity theme crops up again against the ring here. And there are those young women who believe they can actually remember the pill, therefore think it's a much easier form to take. Some women also believe that the side effects are considered manageable. And at this point in the quantitative data, we also found that this group of young women who either believed that the negative attributes of the other product were actually manageable became a small cohort of young women, around 22% for both products, of young women who believed they could use the product regardless of these negative attributes, which generally were perceived by most of our sample. There was this willingness to learn to use the ring by said cohort. And so a smaller group of women, they thought actually the ring would be a way of talking to their partner and actually engaging with them around this issue. Again, emotionally, some women were frightened or scared by the ring and therefore felt uneasy, and this anxiety prevented them to really connect with the ring. Socially, we found that the ring offered greater degree of discretion. It's inserted, and it can also look like a women's health product and not a medicine. And a lot of women stated comfort to telling their partner. Again, though, for similar reasons, the pill was believed to be easier to hide from partners, and they felt there would be some support between friends on using the pill. So we want to show that this comparative lens really did impact the way young women decided which product they preferred. So choice becomes a critical factor in order to make decisions. Next slide, please, Catherine. Thank you. Just to go back to this push and pull framework. So the outcome of being healthy is very attractive to young women. They know what it means to be healthy, what kind of indicators will tell you if someone is healthy. It means they have this ability to look and feel good. They currently believe they have a lack of control over this aspect. For example, they don't make decisions on what they eat. They don't make the decisions on whether they live in an overcrowded area. They don't make decisions on the sanitation that's around them. And they don't make decisions on their sexual health with regard to using protection. And there is that acceptance of the impossibility of abstaining. So both this push of the current situation, which are those lacks of control, and the attraction of a new situation, which is being healthy and looking good, create a combination of a push, which is a promotion to change new behavior. However, we really wanted to express that these young women are very cognizant of the pulls that are around them. So the pulls can be broken up into a habit of the present, so things that they're just used to doing, or the fact that the new situation might make young women feel anxious. So for example, current eating habits, exercising habits, what the family is cooking, the home environment, those are habits of the present that cannot change and actually are sustaining the status quo. However, there are anxieties related to the financial demands of a healthy lifestyle, the sexual relationships that they don't have protection from STIs and HIV, and the fact that actually the products themselves, as we just saw, have some concerns in terms of specific attributes. So, for example, insertion or side effects. And these anxieties are also blocks for changing to a new behavior. Next slide, please, Catherine. Okay, so we just mentioned this earlier about the packaging. We just thought this theme really came very strong, whether it's because younger women really understand packaging and how things look, but non-medicalization and non-sexualization are very important narratives. And so being healthy and making the story about being healthy part of a general conversation about health is going to support prevention products. So I've already mentioned that if it was the product for the ring was to look more like a sanitary product or a women's health product, or the pill packaging, which should have two L's, oh, it's just a bit, sorry, it's just a bit odd on that slide, should look like a vitamin. Now what this means is that we're bringing these two products into a general health discussion and connecting it back to very important indicators of health, which is body image, immunity, energy, hygiene, things like that. If it's too medical or HIV related solely, there is this fear of stigma and openness to use. And this is again because young women, when they're talking to us about this, are very cognizant of the current belief system and responses to sex, HIV within their community. Sorry, Catherine, I still can't change. Thank you. This slide actually we would like to rehouse, considering we've now taken learnings from the quantitative phase. At the qual phase, we did see a gap, a gulf between health and sexual health in terms of both the sorts of influences and the type of information young women were learning. So in health, we really found that older female relatives were trusted. And the health discussion was very general around hygiene, immunity, and energy. Sexual health, the first place young women went was the internet. In the quantitative phase, there's a slight difference in the sense that actually the internet providers become the main source of information and sexual health. But still, young women and female influencers are still bridging some sort of a gap, and this would be experience. So instead of talking about sources of information, if we talked about sources of advice, older women and female relatives would become incredibly important and influential. But what we learned here is, again, the same communication platform that general health is using should be used for HIV prevention. So operating with the media platforms that young women are seeing already about body image, diet, and hygiene are actually places to leverage for the discussion of HIV prevention. Next slide, please, Catherine. Sorry about this. We did a lot of work on trying to understand where young women would seek advice and where would they believe to access this sort of information and products. And this actually was validated in the quantitative findings. But the range of support for young women needs to be quite broad. And what we mean by this is that providing support from healthcare providers or experienced users or a website or face-to-face, this would be an entire platform for young women to access. It's not enough just to have face-to-face meetings with a doctor. We need to provide a multitude of access points and information support. And within an environment that's non-judgmental. So a lot of young women, and we've heard this before, talk about the fact that the current places to get information, for example, at clinics or hospitals, feel quite judgmental for young women and feel quite difficult for young women. So being able to access a supportive, informal structure would really help young women to even feel encouraged to do that. And this was very heavily endorsed by the quant phase, that women who have experience using these products are going to be a critical group to actually engage young women with and to convince them that these products are both comfortable to use and work. On top of that, we've mentioned those people within this non-judgmental environment also need to be professional and informed, and this is the role of the healthcare provider who is critical. Young women see them as educated people who know what the product is meant to do, is able to tell them what the product will, how it will work, the side effects, how to insert the ring, for example, and this would be incredibly important moving forward. And what we mean by accessible is what we were talking about earlier, is that this needs to be quite a broad range of access points and information support. So all the way from using social media and internet through to videos on YouTube, demonstration events, mobile support clinics, and even radio in terms of calling for advice. Thank you. Next slide, please, Catherine. We finally wanted just to bring back this pull aspect and the essential importance of the community. What you can see on the community and young women. Young women feel themselves to be informed, aspirational, and open, but they feel this complete opposite for the community that they're living in. It's uninformed, it's judgmental, and it can be secretive somewhat. And this was actually, again, strengthened by our quantitative findings. Young women believe they think differently than the older people in their community, for example. Young women also believe that the community doesn't understand HIV prevention and therefore would need a lot of help in order to engage them. What this means is it's not the end of the discussion. Young women believe that the community can be engaged. They believe that the community is actually not only important, but once they are made to understand why HIV prevention is a good thing, they will support it. So I'll draw our attention to one of the quotes in the grey box at the bottom. One healthy person makes two healthy people, and that makes a healthy community, and a healthy community is a happy community. And this is something that they believe it would convince the community. So these instruments are actually being seen as products for change. and are very important for young women to influence the community and to make the community into something they want to see, which is informed, aspirational, and open. But without the community being enabled on stage and informed, taking up any HIV prevention product. Thank you, Kathleen. And finally, we wanted to talk about and co-packaging. MPTs for young women, it was something that could give women choice. They mentioned in the options, so pregnancy plus HIV, HIV plus STIs. This is Africa. They know they were going to become pregnant at some point, so they want to be able to decide when they're going to become pregnant. But HIV and STIs may continue to be. So this flexibility and setup is necessary for a young woman in order for her to actually life and decide what she needs to do and when. Next slide, please. Co-packaging is also a very interesting concept to young women, and they believe this was a very powerful concept. They perceive it to give them this ability to choose when to start a family. However, some interesting points is that some believed that they would mix up the colors, and also there was some understanding that a young woman could choose to stop if she decided to get pregnant, for example. So there's how well they'll be used, and a slight misunderstanding. But it does illustrate the value of pregnancy plus HIV prevention and the need for setup. Thank you, Kathleen. And that's the quantitative presentation that we presented at the NTN Regional Conference. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much, Moushira, for this rich presentation, and we also look forward to reviewing those quantitative findings. Our next presenter is Barbara Friedland of the Population Council. She's an associate of the Council's HIV and AIDS program based in New York City. Since joining the Council in 1996, she has been involved in both clinical and behavioral research related to HIV prevention, including microbicide acceptability research. Friedland coordinated several international clinical trials as the Council's first candidate microbicide, Caragard, and is currently managing the first in-human study of PC6500, which is grafissin in a carrageenan gel, which will begin enrolling women in the next few weeks at Albert Einstein College of Medicine in the Bronx. Friedland's research also includes efforts to improve adherence and reporting of adherence, as well as informed consent in clinical trials and service delivery. Barbara, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi. For some reason, my computer no longer has the slides. It was just there, and now it is not there. So maybe I can just have you move the slides, because I can't see them now. I'm not sure what happened to them. So can you move them for me?
Absolutely. Here you go.
Okay, great. Okay, so good morning, afternoon, and evening, everybody. I wanted to thank the Initiative for MPTs for inviting me to give this talk. And I wanted to also thank USAID for supporting this work, which is part of our cooperative agreement to develop grafissin. Next slide, please. So what you can see here is the landing page for the survey. And for those of you on this webinar, if you have not yet seen this landing page, please let us know, because I would love to send it to you. We are about halfway to our target of getting 1,000 completed surveys. So that was my little plug. Basically, I'm going to just give you a little bit of background about the purpose of the survey, the design and the methods, share a little bit of preliminary data, and then talk about the next steps. So as I mentioned a moment ago, the survey is part of our product development agreement with USAID, working to develop a grafissin gel. But the survey was designed to look at different formulations and also whether women were interested in on-demand product or long-acting products, whether they were most interested in HIV or STD prevention or a combination. So we had a limited budget, and so decided that we would do an internet survey to get a big response from people all over the world, hopefully, and that way we could group women together and see if there are certain patterns in terms of their preferences. Next page. So the study design and methods. The study is quantitative. It's an internet survey, and we have a study protocol that was approved by the Population Council's IRB. This was the first internet survey done by the Population Council, so it was an interesting process to go through the review and approval of an online survey with consenting online. Our goal, as I mentioned a moment ago, is to have 1,000 surveys among 18 to 49-year-old women, so this is women of reproductive age. We are recruiting through listservs, news groups, websites, social media, and other relevant platforms. And I've also been working together with a couple of colleagues in South Africa. We provided tablets to them so that they could administer the survey to their participants in various studies in their clinic waiting rooms. So that's been extremely helpful for us, getting a lot of data from South Africa, and we're looking to expand that to some other places as well. And in terms of analysis, we're going to look at associations between demographics, women's characteristics in other words, and past vaginal product and contraceptive use and their interest in different products. And we also, as I mentioned, we want to look at similar groups of women and their product preferences. So I'll get to this in a moment. The minimum sample we need to answer our key research question was 400, but the more women we get, the more we'll be able to group them into different preferences. Next slide, please. So this slide is a animated slide, so you can just keep clicking on it as all the different collaborators come up. It doesn't matter if they go exactly with what I'm saying. It's a highly collaborative effort, both internally and externally. So in terms of internally, as I mentioned, it was a collaboration with the Product Development Program at our Center for Biomedical Research, where we develop different products, including contraceptives and HIV prevention products, and products for HIV and other STDs. So we worked together to develop the survey, and we have our statistics group working with us. And then it was an enormous effort from our IT team to program the survey. And then our publications and creative services helped us with some of the design aspects. And then in terms of promoting the survey, we have reached out to colleagues working in DREAMS countries as well as our country offices to push the survey out in their areas. In terms of external collaboration, we had two partners up front on the protocol, which Jim Pickett, who is the head of IRMA, he has had a lot of experience with doing online surveys, and so we greatly appreciated his input in helping develop it, as well as Kate Guthrie, who has extensive experience in user perceptibility research. Then once the survey was all ready to go in terms of content, we worked with a company called We Are the Nation to brand the survey. And I just want to take a step back and say that it was really great to hear Moushira's comment about the health versus sex. And if you will notice on our the landing page, we can look at it again in a moment, that the landing page, we branded this as a women's health survey and not focused on sex. So it's nice to see that we have consistent messages around how we're trying to get the information from the women. Next slide, please, which should say preliminary data. And next slide. So are you seeing a map now?
We are.
Okay. Great. So this is data as of September 15th, and you can see that in the red that the most people who responded are in the U.S. and in South Africa, not Alaska necessarily. It's just part of the U.S. A total of 655 women consented to take the survey, and of those, 565 were eligible. And to be eligible to take the survey, people have to be female, 18 or older, and have had to have had sex at least once. Among these people, about 61% are from Africa, mostly from South Africa. 23% are from North America, which is mostly the U.S., and then a smattering of other surveys in other parts of Africa, Asia, and South America. Next slide, please. So the average age of the women in the survey is about 30. And we have been trying to find ways to promote this to get younger women to answer it. I mean, we do have younger women, but we want to have a lot more younger women. So any ideas that people have would be greatly appreciated. Maybe there's some way to link up with the RTR group and the women that they interviewed. In terms of education, not surprisingly, the majority of the participants have a pretty high level of education, with close to 50% having more than a secondary education. And that is similar both in terms of Africa and North America. Next slide, please. So before asking women's opinions about specific products in this survey, we asked them what they felt they needed in general. So this is basically our global effort to try to sort out women's interest in multipurpose prevention technologies. Are people more interested in HIV prevention, contraception, STIs? What are they most concerned about? And then our key research question is, would women be more likely to use an HIV or STD prevention product if it also prevented unintended pregnancy? So as you can see from this slide, 70% of the participants are interested in HIV prevention, 56 and 54 interested in contraception and prevention of other STIs. 82% of the women said they would be more likely to use an HIV or STD prevention product if it also prevented unintended pregnancy. So that is a pretty strong message that MPTs are really highly desired by women. Next slide, please. So in the survey, we have a series of little illustrative videos that show women what new products in development look like. And the ones that we have in the videos that are there because they don't necessarily exist yet are gels, films, tablets, like a vaginal tablet or a fast-dissolve insert, and intravaginal ring. So we show them how they work, and then we ask them about their interest in a range of different products. And each of the different products has different characteristics in terms of whether it's something that was used just for the specific sex act or if it's something that could be used for a month at a time. So all of these products both have the formulation and sort of how long they would be used for. And these questions were asked for HIV prevention. For each woman's survey, the products come up in a random order to avoid the bias of having the same choice first. So no two women have the same order of all the products that you see here on this slide. So what you see here is that the product that people seem most interested in is a fast-dissolving insert. So this is like a vaginal tablet. And we describe this as something that you could be inserted around the time of sex and would protect you for that one sex act. The light color is the interest, and the dark color is the not interest. And so as you can see, the more on-demand products, which are to the left side of the graph, seem to be having more interest than the more long-acting ones, with injectables having the lowest interest and the most people who are not interested. And I know that this differs from what others have found in different studies, but it is just interesting to note this. Also, I want to just say that the products come up in a random order, but we can see what order women saw it in, which I'll get back to that in a minute, because we did want to see if there was any bias based on the order that the products come up in. Next slide, please. So when we were preparing for the seminar, we were talking about the IMPT folks were suggesting that we focus a little bit on the women from the US, because we, in our gut, think that women in the US are probably different from others in terms of their concern about HIV and what kind of products that they're interested in. And so the MPT field is currently really focusing on the contraceptive HIV prevention products, but we believe that there's also a big market for contraceptives combined with other STD prevention, or even just STD MPTs, in particularly in the US and other higher resource settings. And the Population Council and others do have other products in development that are STI contraceptive MPTs, both with and without the HIV STI. So we just think it was very interesting to look at the data that we have so far to see, are women from the US different? And in fact, yes, they are. Only 61% said that they were interested in HIV prevention product, compared to 79% of the women from the rest of the world. So that kind of confirmed what we were thinking. Women in the US were more likely to have used the following prevention strategies: male condoms, monogamy with an HIV-negative partner, limiting their number of partners, and not having sex unless they knew that their partner was HIV negative, and not having anal sex, but they were less likely to have ever used female condoms. So those are the ways that they were different, but they were similar to other women in their stated need for STD prevention, pregnancy prevention, HIV, STD prevention that also prevented pregnancy. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we could see what the order of those questions comes up in the different products. So we wanted to see if survey fatigue, meaning they're at the end of their survey, does it affect their interest in trying specific products? And so in this particular case, for only one product were women more likely to say they were very interested in it when the product was the first item asked about, and that was gel after sex. So for all the other products, it didn't seem to matter if it came up first. People weren't necessarily more likely to be interested in it. So that's interesting, and this is something that we'll keep tracking through the survey. Next slide, please. So in summary, 82% of the women were more interested in an HIV STD prevention product if it also prevented pregnancy. There was more interest in a contraceptive MPT among younger women who were under 25 who also didn't have any children. There was less interest in a contraceptive MPT among users of safe day method, and there was similar interest in CMPTs by relationship status, previous contraceptive, and vaginal product use. Next slide, please. So we are about to launch a version in Spanish, and hopefully that will really bolster the numbers in Latin America. It's currently only available in English. We're currently testing it, and hopefully that will be online in October. And our target end of data collection is December 2017. So we would, again, I'm going to do my little pitch here and say anyone who can help us disseminate this survey would be great. We're about halfway to our, or not quite halfway to the 1,000 target that we want. And then we'll be doing analysis and dissemination. And our hope is that the information that we get from this survey will not only be useful for the Population Council's product development program, but will be very helpful for the IMPT, the field of MPTs and HIV prevention in general. So thank you very much. Last slide. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Barbara, for that interesting presentation, and we do look forward to seeing what the final results will be once you get enough respondents. Our final presenter is Minnis, and before I move on to introduce her, I just want to say that we're running a little short on time. So if folks do have questions that they'd like to ask, please do write them in the chat box. And if we aren't able to get to those questions within the allotted hour, we'll be sure to circulate written responses along with the webinar recording shortly after this webinar. So thanks, everyone. So Ali is a senior research epidemiologist with the Women's Global Health Imperative at RTI International, and she's an associate professor in the School of Public Health at the University of California, Berkeley. Her research addresses social and structural influences on HIV, sexually transmitted infections, and unplanned pregnancy among youth. She integrates quantitative and qualitative methods and uses community-based participatory research principles in the design and implementation of much of her work. End-user research in South Africa and Kenya to assess youth perspectives to inform the design of future HIV and MPT products constitutes the focus of 2 current studies. Ali, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, and thanks so much for the rich presentations we've heard already this morning. So today I'm going to be presenting on end-user research that we've conducted to inform MPT development for young women, with the focus being on MPTs for pregnancy and HIV prevention. And this partnership was led by our team at RTI, conducted in partnership with Impact Research and Development Organization in Kisumu, Kenya, and Sachaba Research Center in Soshanguve, South Africa. The work was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So the overall objective of the TRIO study was to improve understanding of young women's preferences among 3 potential MPT delivery forms for HIV and pregnancy prevention. And we focused on everything from acceptability to preferences, choice, and use through a combined set of research activities. And the focus was on evaluating 3 placebo delivery forms, which included daily oral tablets, a monthly vaginal ring, and 2 monthly intramuscular injections. And the placebo products were chosen to reflect products like the tablets that are currently available for the HIV indication or that are in clinical studies. And the advantage of using placebos in this study was that it allowed evaluation of the product delivery forms, free from side effects that participants might have experienced otherwise. And an important principle for us in designing this work was to really engage participants as co-designers. And we did this from the very outset, hosting participant workshops and conveying throughout through a number of mechanisms that their opinions about the products was critical to the design and the work that was happening to move the field forward in terms of development of MPT. So the centerpiece of the research consisted of this clinical study, which is depicted visually here, which consisted of 2 stages. In the first, we had a crossover period where it was a randomized prospective study where participants used each of the 3 placebo products for 1 month in a random order. So we had 6 product sequences. And then at the end of that 3-month period, they came back each month and conducted some acceptability assessments. They were asked to make a choice among the 3 products for a product that they would then use for the subsequent 2 months. At the midpoint of this period, they could come back and either continue with their current product or switch to a different one. And then at study exit at 5 months, we were then able to look at persistence in use of the products over time. Complementing this clinical study, the quantitative data collection, we had qualitative data that consisted of in-depth interviews as well as focus group discussions at the end of each of the study stages. And then finally, at the end, all participants completed a discrete choice experiment interview that assessed preferences among product attributes. And we conducted this work both with participants who had enrolled in the clinical study and also engaged a community sample drawn from the same communities from which the clinical study participants had been recruited. The study sample consisted, for the clinical study, of 277 women aged 18 to 30. By design, we were aiming to have about half drawn from each of our research sites, and you can see that about 2/3 were 18 to 24. The participants had some underlying differences between sites, which does come to play in terms of our analysis of preferences. In terms of sociodemographics, the marital status and educational attainment varied with sites, with considerably higher marital status in Kenya and more having completed secondary school in South Africa. During the stage 1, where participants were trying each product during that crossover period, at each follow-up visit, they were asked to rate how much they liked using their assigned product over the past month. And they selected their answer using a 5-point Likert scale from disliked very much to like very much, with the midpoint being a neutral position. And they were also shown these thumbs up, which came out of our formative work, requesting some visual way to communicate this concept. And you can see here in the table that injections were the most highly rated product, with a mean of 4.2, remembering that a 3 is a neutral point. And then ring came in second, and that followed by tablet. And these differences are all statistically significant, so in terms of the ordering of the mean ratings. So I don't show it on the slide here. We asked questions at enrollment about the products and people's perceptions of them, prior to having an opportunity to use them. And so this was essentially sort of a hypothetical rating. And for all 3 of the products, the ratings increased after use. And I would note that the highest increase was for the ring, where it shifted from a score that was lower than neutral to actually becoming a more favorable rating. Through qualitative data, we explored some of these changes in acceptability and ratings after having had an opportunity to try the products during the crossover period. This 26-year-old from South Africa reflected on the first time she saw the ring. I was like, wow, this circle thing is going to enter my vagina. I thought it won't be comfortable. But after one day, I don't feel nothing. It's like normal. In exploring the ratings and acceptability measures further during this first phase, we conducted analysis to examine sociodemographic and behavioral factors, as well as product attributes themselves that might be associated with product ratings. And what we found was that it was really the product attributes more than these other factors that were most influential to the rating. On this slide here, I have 2 pieces of information, so I just want to kind of walk you through it. Paying attention first to the numbers in blue and the percentages in the columns under each of the products. These reflect the proportion of women reporting that each product attribute was acceptable. So for example, how the product looks. For the tablet, 62%, injections 88%, and ring 67%. And you can see similarly that in general, the attribute was most favorable for injections, and that there is some variation in these across the 3 products. The second column for each product contains beta coefficients from multivariable linear regression, and the numbers correspond with the mean increase in rating tied to finding that particular attribute acceptable. So there are slightly higher values for increases in the ring relative to the others, but these are all associated with a full increase in that scale of 1 to 5. This slide presents data on young women's product choice at 3 months, so the end of that crossover period after they'd had the opportunity to use each one. And as we saw with the ratings, the choices that women made were also reflective of injections being the most preferred product, and they were the most likely to be chosen overall and also at each of the sites. There were no significant differences between those choosing the proportion choosing the tablets and the ring. However, we did see that in Kenya, the proportion choosing tablets, which is shown here in blue, was higher than South Africa. Okay. So I wanted to share some qualitative findings that illustrate some of the information that we gather from people about their experiences using products during this first phase of the study. And coming back to that idea that I mentioned at the beginning about engaging participants as co-designers, and we really emphasize that it's as important for us to hear about what people don't like as what they do. And so here you can see tablets. I'll let you read the quotes given the time, but concerns about inability to correctly follow dose, not liking the size. For the ring, people having lingering doubts about it, even after they'd had an opportunity to try it, concerns about it coming out, about inserting it, general fear comments. And finally, for injections, really it was the unwillingness to use in the future was tied to the frequency, monthly, and also the pain that people experience. Looking now at the second phase of the study where people were using a product that they had chosen, we were interested in persistence. And here in this slide presents data that 81% continued with their chosen product over the 2 months, with 19% switching after the first month. This was a higher level of switching than we expected, so we did some more qualitative work to try to understand why people had chosen something and then switched. And I'll save that conversation for another time. We asked directly about women's preferences for an MPT product, and would they prefer 2 separate products or 2 in 1? And like what Barbara shared on interest in MPT in their work, that we had extremely high interest in MPT. So nearly all women in South Africa it was 98%, and most in Kenya, about 85%, indicated a preference for an MPT over using 2 separate products. The last piece of data that I wanted to share today is focused on the discrete choice experiment, which was done at the final study visit, as well as with a community sample of young women who were sort of naive to these 3 products. So we have about 550 participants contributing data to our DCE analysis. Essentially, this method is designed to aid understanding of which product attributes are the most influential to preferences in making choices between 2 or more products. So here we have 5 products which are named on the 5 attributes that are named on the far left column, and then different levels of each. And so women, each participant answered 8 choice questions with these hypothetical products. This was all done through a randomized design, and they were randomized to one of 6 choice sets. In brief, the most important attribute was product efficacy, and we see that changes in efficacy were more influential to choice among the Kenyan than the South African respondents. Other attributes that were influential to choice, sort of second most important, was pregnancy prevention and the MPT feature of a product, considerably less so than efficacy, but also important. And product delivery form, which I think I expected to see a bit higher, up on the list, was influential, but more so in South Africa than in Kenya, and again, aligned with the data we had presented and seen in other phases of the work, injections were favored. This is my last data slide. Here we have DCE data looking at preferences based on the choices that people made, and from that calculating 2 scenarios. The first one is depicted in blue, where we basically look at, given the trio products that we examined in our study, presenting them with the most favorable attributes. That would be high HIV prevention efficacy, an MPT product, no side effects, and dosing frequency as we implemented. If people were presented with those 3, the blue distribution here is what % would have chosen the product. So 11% for tablets, 35% for ring, and 54% for injections. And then we changed one thing here with the orange bars, where the trio product had all of these other attributes, except it was no longer an MPT. So, for example, with tablets now, the tablet is no longer an MPT, but the ring and the injections are. And we see that 4% choose tablets, so there's a drop. And so the message here is that when you take away the MPT feature of the product, based on the choices that people made in our study, we see that there's a decrease in the proportion who would have chosen that product. So in closing, strong interest in MPT products, like shared by the other presenters. Injections were most preferred. I just also want to note that 1 in 3 women preferred tablets or ring over an injection. So while there was a clear winner, there's also interest in other products. I think rating of all 3 products increased after use, with the greatest increase in the ring, which was the least familiar product among the 3. Product attributes were most influential. Again, in the DCE, the role of the MPT attribute was highlighted, and the findings underscore what others have seen as well, the need for a method mix that offers choice to meet diverse preferences and life circumstances. So just I'd close with some acknowledgments to all of our site teams, as well as the Gilead for donating the tablets and IPM for the rings. So, further
questions? Thank you so much, Alex, for that.
Yeah, sorry that it ran over. I tried to talk quickly.
No, you did great. And we do not have time to kind of ask Q&A, but we did get a couple of really great questions that we'll circulate responses to in our email follow-up to all participants. And thank you so much, Moushira, Barbara, and Ali, for such great, rich presentations, and also for everyone for participating. This concludes today's webinar. And a recording, as I said, of this webinar will be circulated along with a PDF of certain slides. There are some confidentiality questions for preliminary data, but we'll be circulating that shortly. Have a great morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone.